The December wind howled across the platform of the Eureka Springs depot in Arkansas, carrying with it flakes of snow that landed on Katherine Ashford's emerald traveling dress, and she could feel every eye upon her as the laughter started low and then grew louder among the cluster of cowboys waiting by the station house. She stood there with her two leather trunks beside her, her figure generous in all the ways that fashion magazines said a lady's should not be, her cheeks burning not from the cold, but from the cruel amusement she heard rippling through the crowd of dusty men in their wide-brimmed hats and worn leather chaps. It was January 1885, and Katherine had traveled all the way from Boston to meet a man she had corresponded with for 6 months, a rancher named William Davies, who had promised her a new life in the Arkansas mountains. But William Davies was nowhere to be seen, and these rough frontier men were looking at her like she was some kind of circus attraction brought in for their entertainment. "Lord have mercy, would you look at that?" one of them said loud enough for her to hear, and another one elbowed his companion and said something that made them both double over with laughter. Katherine kept her chin up and her eyes forward, refusing to let them see how their mockery cut into her, how she wanted to gather her skirts and run back onto that train and disappear back to the world she had left behind. But the train was already pulling away from the station with a great billowing of steam and the screech of metal on metal, and she was alone on this platform in a town she did not know, waiting for a man who might not even exist. Most of the cowboys eventually lost interest and wandered toward the saloon across the muddy street, their boots crunching in the thin layer of snow that was trying unsuccessfully to cover the frozen mud. But one man remained, standing apart from the others, leaning against a wooden post with his arms crossed over his chest. He was tall and lean with dark hair that showed beneath his hat, and unlike the others, he was not laughing. He was looking at her with an expression she could not quite read, something between curiosity and concern, and when their eyes met, he did not look away with embarrassment the way a gentleman back east would have done. He simply held her gaze for a long moment, then pushed himself away from the post and began walking toward her with a slow, deliberate stride. Katherine felt her heart begin to pound, unsure whether she should feel afraid or hopeful, and she clutched her reticule tighter in her gloved hands. The man stopped a respectful distance away and touched the brim of his hat in greeting. His eyes were gray, she noticed, the color of the sky before a storm, and there was a kindness in them that the others had lacked. "Madam," he said, his voice deep and rough like gravel underfoot, "I could not help but notice you seem to be waiting for someone who has not arrived." Katherine swallowed hard and nodded. "I am waiting for Mr. William Davies. He was supposed to meet me here at noon." The man's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, and something dark flickered across his features. "William Davies," he repeated, and there was a weight to the way he said the name. "Madam, I am sorry to be the one to tell you this, but William Davies passed away 3 weeks ago. Pneumonia took him quick." The world seemed to tilt beneath Katherine's feet, and she reached out instinctively to steady herself against her trunk. 3 weeks ago. While she had been packing her belongings and saying goodbye to her family, and traveling across half the country with her heart full of hope and nervousness, the man she was coming to marry had been dying. She felt the sting of tears but refused to let them fall, not here, not in front of this stranger and whatever remained of that crowd of cruel cowboys. "I see," she managed to say, though her voice sounded strange to her own ears. "Thank you for telling me." The man shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable with her distress but not walking away. "Do you have somewhere to go? Family or friends in town?" Katherine shook her head. "No, I know no one here. I came from Boston to marry Mr. Davies. We had been corresponding for 6 months, but we had never met in person." A mail-order arrangement, the man said, not unkindly, and Katherine nodded. There was no shame in it, she told herself. Plenty of women came west to marry men they had only known through letters. It was practical, and it was the only adventure that had been available to her. A 24-year-old spinster daughter who had lived in her elder brother's house on sufferance after their parents died. The man seemed to be thinking, his gray eyes distant. Then he focused on her again and said, "My name is Gabriel Quincy. I have a ranch about 5 miles north of town. It is not much, but I have a spare room, and my housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, can chaperone properly. You are welcome to stay there until you figure out what you want to do next. The hotel in town is not suitable for a lady alone." Katherine knew she should be wary of accepting such an offer from a stranger, but what choice did she have? She had spent nearly all her money on the train ticket and her traveling clothes, thinking she would be stepping into a new life as a rancher's wife with a home and security. She had perhaps $20 left to her name, not enough to stay in a hotel for more than a few days, certainly not enough to book passage back to Boston, and even if she could afford it, what would she be returning to? Her brother's wife had made it abundantly clear that Katherine was a burden they could no longer afford to keep. "That is very kind of you, Mr. Quincy," she said carefully, "but I would not want to impose." "It is no imposition," Gabriel said firmly. "It is the decent thing to do. Those men who were laughing at you, they should be ashamed of themselves. You traveled a long way expecting to find a future, and it is not your fault that fate had other plans." He paused, then added, "Besides, I knew William Davies. He was a good man, and I think he would want someone to look after the woman he asked to come all this way." Something in his voice when he spoke of William Davies suggested there was more to the story, but Katherine did not press. She was too tired, too overwhelmed, too close to tears that she was determined not to shed. "Thank you," she said softly. "I accept your offer, Mr. Quincy." Gabriel nodded and picked up both of her trunks as though they weighed nothing, though Katherine knew they were heavy with all her worldly possessions. "My wagon is just over here," he said, tilting his head toward a sturdy-looking buckboard hitched to 2 patient horses. "We should get moving before the snow gets worse. The weather has been unpredictable this winter." Katherine followed him across the platform and down the steps, very aware of the mud that was trying to suck at her good traveling boots. Gabriel loaded her trunks into the back of the wagon with efficient movements, then turned to help her up onto the seat. His hand was steady under her elbow, his touch respectful and brief, and Katherine settled herself on the wooden bench and arranged her skirts around her as best she could. Gabriel climbed up beside her and took the reins, clicking his tongue to the horses, and they began to move away from the depot and down the main street of Eureka Springs. The town was small and rough, the kind of place that had probably sprung up around the railroad and the promise of mineral springs that gave the town its name. There were perhaps 24 buildings, most of them wood frame with false fronts to make them look larger and more prosperous than they were. Katherine saw a general store, a blacksmith, a saloon, a church with a modest steeple, and several other establishments whose purposes she could only guess at. A few people were out despite the cold and the snow, bundled in coats and scarves, and they looked at Gabriel's wagon with curiosity as it passed. "It is not much of a town," Gabriel said, as though reading her thoughts, "but the people are mostly good, hard-working folks. The springs bring in some tourists in the warmer months, people who think the water has healing properties. In winter, it is quieter." "It is very different from Boston," Katherine said, which was an understatement of magnificent proportions. Boston had been brick and cobblestones and gas lamps and crowds of people and the constant noise of civilization. This place was raw and new and smelled of wood smoke and horses, and the sharp, clean scent of snow. "I imagine it is," Gabriel said. "What made you want to leave?" It was a personal question, perhaps too personal for people who had just met, but Katherine found herself answering anyway. "My parents died when I was 19. My older brother took me in, but his wife never wanted me there. I tried to make myself useful, but I was just another mouth to feed, another expense they could not afford. When I saw Mr. Davies's advertisement in the newspaper, it seemed like an opportunity to have a life of my own, to be wanted somewhere." Gabriel was quiet for a moment, guiding the horses around a particularly deep rut in the road. "You should be wanted somewhere," he said finally. "Those cowboys back at the station, they were fools." A woman with courage enough to travel across the country to start a new life, that is something to admire, not mock. Katherine felt her cheeks warm, and she looked down at her gloved hands folded in her lap. "They were laughing at my appearance," she said quietly. "I am not blind to the fact that I do not fit the fashionable ideal." "Fashion is a foolish thing," Gabriel said bluntly. "Out here, people care more about whether you can work hard and whether you keep your word. The rest is just vanity." He glanced at her, and there was something in his expression that made her breath catch. "Besides, I think you look just fine." It was not a flowery compliment, not the kind of pretty words that men in Boston might have used, but somehow it meant more because of that. Katherine felt something warm unfurl in her chest, something that had been frozen tight since she had heard those cowboys laughing. "Thank you, Mr. Quincy," she said. "Gabriel," he corrected. "If you are going to be staying at my ranch, even for a short while, we might as well skip the formalities." "Gabriel," Katherine repeated, trying out the name. "And you may call me Katherine or Kate if you prefer." "Katherine suits you," Gabriel said. "It is a strong name." They rode in silence for a while, leaving the town behind and heading north along a road that wound through hills covered in bare trees and patches of snow. The landscape was beautiful in a stark way, all browns and grays and whites, with the occasional dark green of a pine tree breaking up the monotony. Katherine could hear the jingle of the harness and the creak of the wagon wheels and the steady breathing of the horses, and despite everything that had happened, despite the uncertainty of her future, she felt a strange sense of calm settling over her. "How did you know William Davies?" she asked after a while, curious about the man she had been planning to marry, the man she would now never meet. Gabriel's hands tightened on the reins. "We were neighbors. His ranch bordered mine to the east. He was a widower, lost his wife about 5 years ago to childbed fever along with the baby. It nearly destroyed him. He threw himself into his work, barely spoke to anyone for a long time. When he started talking about finding a new wife through correspondence, I thought maybe he was finally ready to live again." "That is terribly sad," Katherine said, her heart aching for the man who had written her such hopeful letters about the future they might build together. "His letters never mentioned his first wife." "Some grief is too deep to put into words," Gabriel said. "I think he wanted a fresh start, and talking about the past would have made that harder." He paused, then added, "His ranch is sitting empty now. His brother back in Missouri inherited it, but he has not decided yet whether to sell it or try to run it from a distance." Katherine nodded, absorbing this information. It was strange to think that there was a house somewhere nearby that was supposed to have been her home, a life that had been planned out and was now just gone like smoke. "Did you know him well?" she asked. "Well enough," Gabriel said. "We helped each other out during Roundup, shared equipment when something broke, that kind of thing. He was a good man, honest and fair. I think you would have liked him." "I am sorry he died," Katherine said, and she meant it. She was sorry for William Davies, who had lost so much and had been trying to find happiness again. She was sorry for herself, for the future that had been snatched away before it even began. And she was sorry for this man beside her, Gabriel Quincy, who had lost a neighbor and friend, and who was now helping a stranger out of what seemed to be pure decency. The road curved and began to climb, and soon they were passing under a wooden arch with the words Quincy Ranch burned into the crossbeam. The ranch itself came into view gradually, nestled in a shallow valley between two hills. There was a house, 2 stories with a wide porch wrapped around the front, built of rough-hewn logs that had weathered to a soft gray. A barn stood off to one side, large and sturdy-looking, and beyond that were several other outbuildings and a corral where a few horses stood with their backs to the wind. Smoke rose from the chimney of the main house, a welcoming sight against the gray sky. "It is not fancy," Gabriel said, almost apologetically, "but it is solid and warm." "It looks wonderful," Katherine said honestly. After days of travel and the crushing disappointment at the train station, the sight of that house with its smoke and its promise of warmth was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. Gabriel pulled the wagon up to the front of the house and jumped down, then came around to help Katherine descend. Her legs were stiff from sitting, and she stumbled slightly on the icy ground, but Gabriel's hand was there to steady her, strong and sure. He left the trunks in the wagon for the moment and guided her up the steps and across the porch. The front door opened before they reached it, and a small Chinese woman in a practical gray dress and white apron stood in the doorway, her dark eyes sharp and curious. "Mr. Gabriel," she said with a slight accent, "you bring guest." "This is Miss Katherine Ashford," Gabriel said. "She came to town to marry William Davies, but she arrived too late. She needs a place to stay for a while, and I offered her our spare room. Katherine, this is Mrs. Chen. She keeps this house running and makes the best stew you will ever eat." Mrs. Chen studied Katherine for a long moment, and Katherine had the feeling she was being assessed and judged in ways she could not even begin to understand. Then the older woman nodded once and stepped back to allow them entry. Come in," she said. "Too cold to stand outside talking. I make tea." The interior of the house was warm and smelled of wood smoke and something savory cooking. Katherine found herself in a large room that served as both parlor and dining area, with a massive stone fireplace taking up most of one wall. The furniture was simple but well made, clearly built for use rather than show, and there were Navajo rugs on the wooden floor adding spots of color. Everything was clean and orderly, and Katherine felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. This was a real home, a place where people lived and worked and cared about their surroundings. "Let me show you to your room," Gabriel said, and Katherine followed him up a narrow staircase to the second floor. There were 3 doors up here, and Gabriel opened the middle one to reveal a small bedroom with a single bed covered in a patchwork quilt, a dresser with a mirror, a washstand, and a window that looked out over the valley. It was simple and plain, but it was clean and private, and Katherine felt a rush of gratitude so strong it almost brought her to tears. "This is perfect," she said. "Thank you, Gabriel, truly." He nodded, looking slightly uncomfortable with her gratitude. "I will bring up your trunks, Mrs. Chen will get you some hot water for washing, and supper will be ready in about an hour. Come down whenever you are ready." He left, closing the door behind him, and Katherine stood alone in the room and finally allowed herself to feel everything she had been holding back. She sank down onto the edge of the bed and pressed her hands to her face, and for a few minutes, she simply breathed and tried to process the enormity of what had happened. Her carefully planned future was gone. She was alone in a strange place with no money and no prospects. But she was not homeless, at least not tonight, and the man who had rescued her from that awful platform had kind eyes and a steady voice and had not looked at her with disgust or mockery. A knock on the door brought her back to herself, and Mrs. Chen entered carrying a pitcher of steaming water and a towel. "You wash," the woman said, setting the items on the washstand. "You need anything, you tell me. Supper soon." "Thank you, Mrs. Chen," Catherine said. "I appreciate your kindness." The older woman paused at the door and looked back at her. "Mr. Gabriel is good man," she said firmly. "You are safe here. Do not worry." It was exactly what Catherine needed to hear, and she felt tears sting her eyes again. "Thank you," she whispered, and Mrs. Chen nodded and left, closing the door softly behind her. Catherine washed her face and hands, changed out of her traveling dress into something more comfortable, and tried to make herself presentable. Her reflection in the small mirror showed a woman with auburn hair that was struggling to stay in its pins, green eyes that were tired and red-rimmed, and a face that was too round and soft by fashionable standards. She looked like what she was, a woman who had traveled too far and been disappointed too deeply. But she lifted her chin and reminded herself that she was stronger than she looked. She had survived her parents' deaths and her brother's indifference and that long journey west, and she would survive this too. When she went downstairs, she found Gabriel had moved to the fireplace, staring into the flames with a distant expression. He looked up when he heard her steps and immediately stood, gesturing to the table where Mrs. Chen was setting out bowls and plates. "Please sit," he said. "I hope you are hungry. Mrs. Chen does not approve of people who do not eat well." Catherine sat at the table, and Mrs. Chen ladled thick stew into her bowl, followed by fresh bread still warm from the oven. The smell alone was enough to make Catherine's stomach growl, and she realized she had not eaten since breakfast on the train, and that had been nothing but a stale roll and weak coffee. She picked up her spoon and took a bite, and the flavors exploded on her tongue, rich and hearty and perfect. "This is delicious," she said to Mrs. Chen, who allowed herself a small smile of satisfaction before taking her own seat at the table. Gabriel said grace, short and simple, and they ate in companionable silence for a few minutes. Catherine watched Gabriel covertly, trying to understand this man who had helped her without expecting anything in return. He was probably in his late 20s, handsome in a rough-hewn way, with strong hands and a face that looked like it did not smile often but should. There was a quietness to him, a sense of contained strength, and Catherine found herself feeling safe in a way she had not felt in a long time. "What will you do?" Gabriel asked eventually, breaking the silence. "Will you go back to Boston?" Catherine set down her spoon and considered the question. "I do not think I can," she admitted. "I spent almost all my money on the ticket out here. Even if I wanted to go back, I do not have the means and I do not have anywhere to go back to. My brother made it clear I was not welcome." Gabriel frowned. "Family should take care of family." "That is the ideal," Catherine said with a slight smile, "but the reality is often different. My sister-in-law has 4 children of her own and not much patience for an unmarried sister who she sees as competition for resources." "Then you will stay here until you figure out your next step," Gabriel said decisively. "There is plenty of room and we could use help around the ranch. Mrs. Chen is not getting any younger and she could use an extra pair of hands with the cooking and cleaning. It would not be charity, you would be working for your keep." Mrs. Chen nodded approvingly. "Good idea," she said. "Too much work for one person." Catherine felt that warmth in her chest again, that sense of being valued and wanted. "Are you sure?" she asked. "I do not want to be a burden." "You will not be a burden if you are working," Gabriel said practically, "and it gives you time to decide what you want to do." There are not many options for a woman alone out here, but maybe something will turn up. Maybe the schoolteacher position will open, or maybe one of the shopkeepers in town needs help. It was not the future Katherine had imagined when she left Boston, but it was a future nonetheless, and she was grateful for it. "Then I accept," she said. "Thank you, Gabriel, and thank you, Mrs. Chen. I promise I will work hard and earn my place here." "Good, Mrs. Chen said, and went back to her stew with the air of someone who had solved a problem and was now moving on to the next thing. They finished the meal, and Katherine helped clear the dishes despite Mrs. Chen's protests that she was a guest. "If I am going to be working here, I might as well start now," Katherine said firmly, and Mrs. Chen gave her an approving look and allowed it. After the dishes were done, Gabriel excused himself to go check on the horses, and Mrs. Chen showed Katherine where everything was kept in the kitchen. The pantry stocked with supplies for the winter. The root cellar dug into the hillside behind the house where vegetables and preserved goods were stored. It was a well-run household, and Katherine could see the years of careful work that had gone into making it so. That night, Katherine lay in the narrow bed in the room that was hers for now, listening to the wind howl around the eaves and the unfamiliar sounds of this new place. She thought about William Davies, the man she had never met but who had offered her hope, and she said a quiet prayer for his soul. She thought about Gabriel Quincy, the man who had seen her at her most vulnerable and had chosen to help rather than mock. And she thought about herself, Katherine Ashford, 24 years old and starting over in a place she had never imagined being. She did not know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like she had a chance to find out. And as she drifted off to sleep, she realized she was not afraid anymore. She was curious, and that was a much better feeling. The days that followed fell into a pattern that was both comforting and strange. Katherine woke early, helped Mrs. Chen prepare breakfast for Gabriel and the two ranch hands who worked for him, a grizzled old cowboy named Pete and a young Mexican man named Mateo who spoke little English but had a quick smile. She learned how to make biscuits the way Gabriel liked them, light and flaky with butter and honey. She learned how to cook beans and bacon and eggs, and how to make coffee strong enough to wake the dead in the mornings. After the men went out to work, Katherine and Mrs. Chen cleaned the house and did laundry and mended clothes and prepared the midday meal. Mrs. Chen was a patient teacher, showing Katherine how to do things the way they were done on a ranch, which was often different from the way she had learned back east. Everything here was about efficiency and making do with what you had, and Katherine found she enjoyed the challenge of it. In the afternoons, Katherine sometimes had free time, and she spent it exploring the ranch or reading the books in Gabriel's small library or writing letters to the few friends she had left in Boston, though she was not sure what she would tell them about her new life. She also spent time in the kitchen with Mrs. Chen, learning to make the dishes that the older woman had brought from her homeland, recipes that used unfamiliar ingredients and techniques, but resulted in meals that were delicious and satisfying. Gabriel was often gone during the day, working on the ranch, fixing fences, checking on the cattle that roamed the hills, dealing with the 100 small crises that seemed to arise constantly. But in the evenings, he came back to the house, and they all ate supper together, and sometimes afterward, Gabriel would sit by the fire and read the newspaper that came once a week from Little Rock, or he would work on carving small wooden figures, a hobby Katherine had discovered by accident when she found a shelf full of them in the parlor. She noticed things about Gabriel during those weeks. She noticed the way he treated everyone with respect, from Mrs. Chen to the ranch hands to the people they encountered when they went into town for supplies. She noticed the way he was unfailingly polite to her, never crossing the boundaries of propriety, but also not treating her like she was made of glass. She noticed the way he listened when she spoke, really listened, and how he remembered small details she mentioned in passing. She noticed the way he moved, economical and graceful despite his size, and the way his hands were rough and scarred from work, but could carve intricate details into wood with surprising delicacy. And she noticed the way her heart started to beat a little faster when she heard his footsteps on the porch, the way she found herself listening for his voice, the way she caught herself watching him when she thought he was not looking. It was the middle of February, 6 weeks after her arrival, when things began to change between them. They had gone into Eureka Springs for supplies, and as they were loading sacks of flour and sugar into the wagon, a man approached them, well dressed by frontier standards, with a watch chain glinting across his vest. "Gabriel Quincy," the man said with a smile that did not reach his eyes. "I have been meaning to talk to you about William Davies's property. I hear his brother is thinking of selling." Gabriel straightened, his expression carefully neutral. "That is none of my business, Mr. Thornton." "Oh, but it could be," the man said. "I am interested in buying it, expanding my holdings. But I need access across your land to get to the best water sources. I would be willing to make it worth your while." "I am not interested in selling any of my land," Gabriel said flatly, "and I am not interested in giving you access to my water." Mr. Thornton's smile faded. "That is short-sighted of you, Quincy. I am trying to be reasonable here, but I could make things difficult if I wanted to." "Is that a threat?" Gabriel asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "It is a fact," Thornton said. "I have connections, Quincy. I have resources." "You are just one man trying to run a ranch on your own. Think about what I am offering." "I have thought about it, and my answer is no," Gabriel said. He turned to Katherine. "Are you ready to go?" Katherine nodded quickly, sensing the tension in the air. Gabriel helped her up onto the wagon seat, and they pulled away from the general store, leaving Mr. Thornton standing on the sidewalk with a dark expression on his face. "Who was that?" Katherine asked once they were out of earshot. "Robert Thornton," Gabriel said, his jaw tight. "He owns the biggest ranch in the area, and he is always looking to get bigger. He has been trying to buy out smaller ranchers for years, and he does not take no for an answer gracefully." "Should you be worried?" Katherine asked, concerned by the anger she could see in Gabriel's eyes. "Maybe," Gabriel admitted. "Thornton has a reputation for getting what he wants one way or another, but I am not selling my land and I am not giving him access to my water. The Quincy Ranch has been in my family for 30 years, and I am not going to be the one who loses it." Katherine reached out without thinking and placed her hand on his arm. "I am sure you will find a way," she said. "You are a good rancher and a good man. That has to count for something." Gabriel looked down at her hand, then up at her face, and something passed between them, something electric and charged. "Thank you, Katherine," he said softly. "That means more than you know." She withdrew her hand, suddenly flustered, and they rode the rest of the way back to the ranch in silence. But it was a different kind of silence than before, heavy with unspoken things. That night after supper, Mrs. Chen announced she was going to bed early because her rheumatism was bothering her, and Katherine found herself alone with Gabriel in the parlor for the first time since she had arrived. She sat by the fire with some mending, and Gabriel sat in his chair with his carving, and for a long time neither of them spoke. Finally, Gabriel set down his knife and the piece of wood he was working on and looked at her. "Katherine," he said, "can I ask you something?" "Of course," she said, setting aside the shirt she was mending. "Do you regret coming here?" he asked. "I know it is not what you expected, and I know your situation is not easy, but do you regret it?" Katherine considered the question carefully. "No," she said finally. I do not regret it. I am sorry that William Davies died, and I am sorry that I did not get the chance to know him. But I think, in a strange way, this is where I was meant to be. I feel more alive here than I ever did in Boston. I feel like I matter, like the work I do has purpose. And I feel welcome, which is something I had not felt in a long time. Gabriel nodded slowly. I am glad, he said, because I have to admit I am glad you are here. The house feels different with you in it. It feels more like a home. Catherine's heart began to pound. Gabriel, she said carefully, what are you saying? He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, and looked at her with those storm-gray eyes. I am saying that I care about you, Katherine. I know it has only been a few weeks, and I know you came here expecting to marry someone else, but I cannot stop thinking about you. I cannot stop noticing the way you laugh when Mrs. Chen tells stories about her childhood in California, or the way you hum while you work, or the way you are kind to everyone, even Pete when he is grumpy and impossible. I cannot stop thinking that maybe fate brought you here for a reason, and maybe that reason was not William Davies. Katherine could barely breathe. I care about you too, she said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. I have been trying not to because it seems wrong somehow, like I would be betraying William Davies or taking advantage of your kindness. But I do care about you, Gabriel. More than I should, probably. There is no should about it, Gabriel said. He stood and crossed to where she sat, kneeling down so they were at eye level. Katherine, I know this is sudden and I know you might need time. But I have to tell you what I am feeling because I am not good at hiding things, and I do not want there to be misunderstandings between us. I would like to court you properly, if you will let me. And if things go well, I would like to marry you, not because you need a home or I need a housekeeper, but because I think we could be happy together. I think we could build something real. Katherine felt tears welling up, but these were different from the tears she had shed on the train platform. These were tears of joy and hope and relief. Yes, she said. Yes, Gabriel, I would like that very much. He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his face and made him look younger and happier than she had ever seen him. He reached out and took her hand, holding it gently. Then we will do this right, he said. We will take our time and get to know each other and let this grow the way it is supposed to. And when we are both sure, when there are no doubts, then we will talk about marriage. That sounds perfect, Katherine said, and she squeezed his hand, marveling at how right it felt, how safe and warm and full of promise. They sat together by the fire for a long time that night, talking about everything and nothing, learning each other's stories and dreams. Gabriel told her about growing up on the ranch, about his father who had died 5 years ago and his mother who had died when he was just a boy. He told her about the hard winters and the dry summers and the constant struggle to keep the ranch going. He told her about his hopes for the future, about wanting to build something lasting, about wanting a family of his own someday. Katherine told him about her childhood in Boston, about her parents who had loved her but died too young, about her brother who had been kind once but had changed after he married. She told him about the loneliness of being unwanted, about the fear that she would never find a place where she belonged. She told him about the courage it had taken to answer William Davies's advertisement, to leave everything she knew for the possibility of something better. I am glad you were brave enough to take that chance, Gabriel said as the fire burned down to embers. Even if it brought you here under sad circumstances, I am glad you came. So am I, Katherine said, and she meant it with her whole heart. The courtship that followed was unlike anything Katherine had experienced before. In Boston, courtship had been formal and structured, with calling hours and chaperones and strict rules about propriety. Here on the ranch, it was simpler and more honest. Gabriel courted her by teaching her to ride a horse, patiently showing her how to hold the reins and how to communicate with the animal beneath her. He courted her by carving her a small wooden bird and presenting it to her shyly at breakfast. He courted her by fixing the loose floorboard in her room without being asked, by bringing her wildflowers when he came back from checking the cattle, by listening to her read aloud from books in the evening. Katherine courted him back by learning to make his favorite foods, by mending his clothes with careful stitches, by laughing at his dry humor, by sitting with him on the porch in the evenings and watching the sun set over the hills. She courted him by being herself, unguarded and honest, and by showing him that she valued him not for what he could provide but for who he was. Mrs. Chen watched them with approval, occasionally muttering comments in Cantonese that Katherine suspected were about how it was about time Gabriel found someone, or how young people these days did not know how lucky they were. Pete and Mateo noticed too, and they treated Katherine with a kind of protective deference, as though she were already the lady of the house. But their happiness was not without challenges. In early March, trouble came in the form of Robert Thornton, who had not forgotten Gabriel's refusal to sell. Several of Gabriel's cattle went missing, and when Gabriel went looking for them, he found them on Thornton's land, mixed in with Thornton's herd. Thornton claimed it was an honest mistake, that the cattle must have wandered, but Gabriel knew better. Fences had been cut, and the cattle had been driven onto Thornton's property deliberately. Gabriel retrieved his cattle and repaired his fences, but it was clear that Thornton was not going to give up. More problems followed. A barn door was damaged in a way that looked deliberate. Supplies went missing. One of Gabriel's ranch hands, a young man named Tommy who had worked there for 2 years, quit suddenly, and word around town was that Thornton had offered him more money to work for him instead. Katherine watched Gabriel grow tenser and more worried, and she wished there was something she could do to help. She tried to support him in small ways, making sure he ate well and got enough rest, listening when he needed to talk about his frustrations. But she could see the toll it was taking on him, the weight of responsibility and the fear that he might lose everything he had worked for. One evening in late March, Gabriel came back to the house looking exhausted and defeated. He sat down at the table and put his head in his hands, and Katherine immediately went to him, placing her hand on his shoulder. "What happened?" she asked gently. "More cattle missing," Gabriel said without looking up. "I do not know how they are doing it. I have been checking the fences constantly and I have not found any new breaks, but 6 head are gone and I cannot afford to keep losing animals like this." "Have you talked to the sheriff?" Katherine asked. Gabriel laughed bitterly. "The sheriff is in Thornton's pocket. Everyone knows it. He will not do anything unless I have proof, and even then I am not sure it would matter." Katherine felt a surge of anger on his behalf. "That is not right," she said. "There has to be something we can do." Gabriel looked up at her, and there was something vulnerable in his eyes. "Katherine, this is not your fight. You did not sign up for this when you agreed to let me court you." "Maybe not," Katherine said firmly, "but I am choosing to be part of it now. You have given me so much, Gabriel. You gave me a home when I had nowhere to go. You treated me with respect and kindness. You showed me what it means to be valued. Let me help you now. Let me stand with you." Gabriel stared at her for a long moment, and then he stood and pulled her into his arms, holding her tight against his chest. Katherine wrapped her arms around him and held on, feeling the steady beat of his heart and the strength of his embrace. And she knew in that moment that she loved him, completely and irrevocably. "I love you," Gabriel said, his voice muffled against her hair, and Katherine's breath caught because she had not expected him to say it first, had not been sure if he felt as deeply as she did. "I love you too," she whispered back, and Gabriel pulled back just enough to cup her face in his hands and kiss her. It was Catherine's first real kiss, and it was everything she had imagined and nothing like it at the same time. It was gentle and fierce and desperate and tender all at once, and when they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard and looking at each other with wonder. "Marry me," Gabriel said. "Not because you need security or I need help running the ranch, but because I love you and I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Marry me, Catherine." "Yes," Catherine said without hesitation. "Yes, I will marry you." They stood there holding each other, and Catherine felt like her heart might burst with happiness. All the fear and uncertainty of the past month seemed to fall away, replaced by the simple, solid certainty that this was right, that Gabriel was her future and she was his. But their celebration was short-lived. The next morning, Gabriel and Pete were out riding the property when they found something that made Gabriel's blood run cold. Someone had poisoned one of the watering holes that the cattle used, dumping something into it that had killed 2 cows and made several others sick. It was a malicious act, designed to cause maximum damage, and it was clear that Thornton was escalating his campaign. Gabriel reported it to the sheriff, even knowing it would probably do no good, and his suspicions were confirmed when the sheriff barely bothered to investigate, claiming there was no evidence of foul play. Gabriel was furious, but he channeled that fury into action. He organized the ranch hands to watch the property in shifts, making sure someone was always patrolling. He rode into town and talked to the other small ranchers, trying to build alliances against Thornton's aggression. Catherine, meanwhile, had an idea. She remembered something Mrs. Chen had mentioned in passing, about how there was a territorial land office that kept records of property boundaries and water rights. If they could prove that Thornton was trying to steal access to water that legally belonged to Gabriel and the other small ranchers, they might be able to bring in federal authorities who were not under Thornton's influence. She proposed the idea to Gabriel, and he looked at her with such admiration that Catherine felt herself blushing. "That is brilliant," he said. "Why did I not think of that?" "Because you have been too busy trying to protect your ranch," Catherine said. "But we are a team now, Gabriel. We figure things out together." Gabriel kissed her then, hard and quick, and went to saddle his horse to ride into town and send a telegram to the land office in Little Rock. It would take time for officials to come out and investigate, but it was hope, and hope was something they desperately needed. In the meantime, Gabriel decided that he and Catherine should get married as soon as possible. "I do not want to wait," he said. "Life is uncertain, and I want you to be my wife, legally and in every way that matters. If something happens to me, I want to know that you are protected, that the ranch will be yours." Catherine understood what he was not saying, that he was worried about Thornton's escalating violence, that he wanted to make sure she was taken care of no matter what. "Then we will get married," she said. "But nothing is going to happen to you, Gabriel Quincy. I will not allow it." He smiled at her fierce tone. "Yes, madam," he said. They were married a week later in the small church in Eureka Springs, with Mrs. Chen and Pete and Mateo as witnesses. The preacher was a kind, elderly man who seemed genuinely happy to perform the ceremony, and Catherine wore her best dress, the one she had brought from Boston, thinking she would wear it to marry William Davies. It felt right to wear it now to marry Gabriel instead, like the dress had always been meant for this moment. Gabriel wore a new shirt and his best trousers, and he had shaved and gotten his hair cut, and Catherine thought he looked impossibly handsome standing at the altar waiting for her. When she walked down the short aisle, she saw the way his eyes lit up, the way he smiled like she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen, and she knew she had made the right choice. The ceremony was simple. They exchanged vows, promising to love and honor each other in sickness and health, for richer or poorer, as long as they both should live. Gabriel slipped a gold band onto Catherine's finger, a ring that had belonged to his mother, and Catherine did the same for him with a ring they had bought together at the general store. The preacher pronounced them husband and wife, and Gabriel kissed her in front of their small gathering of friends, and Catherine felt joy surge through her so powerfully she thought she might float away. They had a modest celebration back at the ranch with Mrs. Chen cooking a special meal and Pete producing a bottle of whiskey he had been saving for a special occasion. They ate and drank and laughed, and for a few hours, Catherine could almost forget about Robert Thornton and his threats and the uncertainty of their future. All that mattered was that she was married to the man she loved, that they had found each other against all odds, that they were building a life together. That night, Gabriel carried her over the threshold of the house and up the stairs to his room, which was now their room. Catherine had been nervous about this part of marriage, unsure of what to expect, but Gabriel was patient and gentle with her, making sure she was comfortable, showing her with his hands and his mouth and his body how much he loved her. And Catherine discovered that passion was something she was capable of feeling, that the intimacy of marriage was not something to be feared but celebrated. And when she finally fell asleep in Gabriel's arms, she felt more content and complete than she ever had before. The next few weeks were a honeymoon period in every sense of the word. Gabriel and Catherine settled into married life with an ease that surprised both of them. They worked side by side during the day, and they fell into bed together at night, learning each other's bodies and hearts. Catherine felt herself blooming under Gabriel's love, becoming more confident and more sure of herself. She was no longer the woman who had stood on that train platform expecting mockery. She was Gabriel Quincy's wife, and she was proud of it, but reality intruded as it always does. In mid-April, the officials from the Territorial Land Office finally arrived to investigate the complaints about water rights. They spent several days surveying the area, talking to ranchers, examining documents, and what they found was damning for Robert Thornton. He had indeed been trying to redirect water sources that were on other people's property, and he had been using intimidation and illegal tactics to drive out smaller ranchers so he could expand his holdings. The officials issued a cease and desist order and threatened Thornton with federal prosecution if he continued his illegal activities. It was a major victory for Gabriel and the other small ranchers, and for a while, it seemed like things would finally settle down. But Thornton was not a man who accepted defeat gracefully. 2 weeks after the officials left, a fire broke out in Gabriel's barn in the middle of the night. Gabriel and Catherine were woken by the sound of the horses screaming, and they ran outside to find the barn engulfed in flames. Gabriel and his ranch hands managed to get the horses out, and they fought the fire with buckets of water from the well. But by the time the flames were under control, the barn was a total loss. Gabriel stood looking at the smoking ruins, his face grim, and Catherine knew what he was thinking. This was Thornton's doing, a final act of revenge for being thwarted. But once again there was no proof, nothing that could be taken to the authorities. "We will rebuild," Catherine said, taking Gabriel's hand. "We will rebuild and we will not let him win." Gabriel looked at her and some of the darkness left his eyes. "How did I get so lucky to find you?" he asked. "I think we found each other," Catherine said. "And we are going to be fine, Gabriel, I promise." And they were. It took months of hard work and money they could barely afford to spend, but they rebuilt the barn, bigger and better than before. And in the process, something changed in the community. The other small ranchers, inspired by Gabriel and Catherine's refusal to give up, banded together to support each other. They helped with the rebuilding, contributing materials and labor. They formed a cooperative to share resources and protect each other from men like Thornton. Thornton himself, faced with united opposition and the watchful eye of federal authorities, finally backed down. He did not leave the area, but he stopped his campaign of harassment, focusing instead on managing his own ranch. It was not the complete victory that Gabriel might have wanted, but it was enough. They could live in peace. As summer turned to fall and then to winter again, Katherine and Gabriel settled into the rhythms of ranch life. They worked hard, but they also found time for joy. Gabriel taught Katherine to shoot, and she turned out to have a natural talent for it that amused them both. Katherine taught Gabriel to dance, insisting that a married couple should know how to waltz, and they practiced in the parlor with Mrs. Chen playing the piano, laughing when Gabriel stepped on her toes. In January of 1886, exactly 1 year after Katherine had arrived in Eureka Springs, she discovered she was pregnant. She told Gabriel over breakfast, watching his face carefully to see how he would react. For a moment, he just stared at her, and then a slow smile spread across his face, and he let out a whoop of joy that brought Mrs. Chen running from the kitchen to see what the commotion was about. "We are going to have a baby," Gabriel announced, scooping Katherine up and spinning her around despite her protests that he would make her dizzy. Mrs. Chen clapped her hands and immediately began planning, talking about how they would need to prepare a nursery and make baby clothes and stock up on supplies. Katherine laughed and cried at the same time, overwhelmed by happiness and fear and excitement all mixed together. The pregnancy was not easy. Katherine suffered from terrible nausea in the early months, and Gabriel hovered over her anxiously, trying to make sure she was comfortable. Mrs. Chen made special teas and soups that were supposed to help, and gradually, Katherine began to feel better. As her belly grew, so did Gabriel's protectiveness. He insisted she not do any heavy work, and he made sure she rested every afternoon. Katherine found it both endearing and frustrating. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," she told him more than once. "I know," Gabriel said, "but you are carrying the most precious thing in the world, and I am going to make sure you and the baby are safe." Katherine could not argue with that, so she let him fuss and tried not to feel too guilty about being coddled. In August, when the summer heat was at its worst, Katherine went into labor. It was long and difficult, and Gabriel paced the downstairs parlor for hours while Mrs. Chen stayed with Katherine upstairs, coaching her through the contractions and telling her when to push. Gabriel had wanted to get the doctor from town, but Katherine's labor had come on too fast, and there had been no time. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Gabriel heard the sound he had been waiting for, the thin, angry cry of a newborn baby. He took the stairs 2 at a time and burst into the bedroom to find Mrs. Chen holding a tiny bundle wrapped in a blanket, and Katherine lying exhausted in the bed, her hair damp with sweat but a smile on her face. "You have a son," Mrs. Chen said, placing the baby in Gabriel's arms. Gabriel looked down at the tiny red face and the impossibly small fingers, and he felt something shift inside him, a love so fierce and immediate that it took his breath away. "A son," he repeated wonderingly, and then he moved to the bed and sat down carefully beside Katherine, showing her their baby. "He is perfect," Katherine whispered, touching the baby's cheek with one finger. "Look at him, Gabriel, we made him." "You did all the hard work," Gabriel said, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "You were so brave, Katherine. I am so proud of you." They named him James after Gabriel's father, and from the moment he was born, he became the center of their world. Gabriel was a devoted father, changing diapers and walking the floor with James when he cried at night, singing off key lullabies that made Katherine giggle. Katherine nursed their son and marveled at how something so small could contain so much personality. James was a serious baby, watching everything with dark eyes that already reminded her of Gabriel's. The months that followed were exhausting but wonderful. Katherine had never been so tired in her life, but she had also never been so happy. She and Gabriel were a team, supporting each other through the sleepless nights and the challenges of new parenthood. Mrs. Chen helped as much as she could, but she also respected their space, letting them figure out how to be parents on their own. As James grew, he became more interactive, smiling and cooing and reaching for things. Gabriel spent every moment he could with his son, and Katherine loved watching them together, seeing the wonder on Gabriel's face as James learned new things. By the time James was a year old, Katherine discovered she was pregnant again. She and Gabriel had talked about wanting a large family, and though the timing was sooner than they might have planned, they were both thrilled. This pregnancy was easier than the first, and Katherine sailed through it with minimal discomfort. In May of 1887, Katherine gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Ellen after Katherine's mother. Ellen was a loud, demanding baby from the moment she was born, and Katherine and Gabriel joked that she had inherited her mother's determination and her father's stubbornness. James, now a toddler, was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to help with everything and occasionally trying to share his toys with her, even though she was too young to appreciate them. Life on the ranch continued to be challenging but rewarding. Gabriel expanded their herd slowly and carefully, making sure they never overextended themselves. Katherine helped with the bookkeeping and the household management, and she also started a vegetable garden that became the envy of the neighboring ranches. Mrs. Chen, now well into her 60s, gradually retired from the heaviest chores, though she still cooked and helped with the children when Katherine needed an extra pair of hands. The years passed in a blur of seasons and milestones. James learned to walk and then to ride, following his father around the ranch on a pony Gabriel had bought specially for him. Ellen grew into a bright, curious girl who asked a million questions and kept Katherine on her toes. In 1889, Katherine gave birth to their third child, another son they named Thomas, and in 1891 their fourth child arrived, a daughter named Margaret. The house was full of noise and life, and Katherine sometimes marveled at how different her reality was from what she had imagined that day. She stood on the train platform in the snow. She had thought she was coming west to marry a man she did not know and live a quiet, practical life. Instead, she had found love and passion and purpose, and she had built a family that was loud and messy and absolutely perfect. Gabriel, too, had found more than he expected. He had thought he would live his life alone after losing so many people he loved, but Katherine had shown him that it was possible to love again, to risk his heart and find it return tenfold. He was a happy man, and it showed in everything he did. Robert Thornton eventually sold his ranch and moved away, unable to compete with the united front of the small ranchers who had banded together. A younger couple bought his property and turned it into a horse breeding operation, and they became good friends with Gabriel and Katherine. The community around Eureka Springs grew stronger and closer, with families helping each other through hard times and celebrating together during good times. In 1893, on a cold January evening, Gabriel and Katherine sat together on the porch of their house, wrapped in blankets and watching the snow fall. Their children were asleep inside. Mrs. Chen was knitting by the fire, and for a moment, everything was quiet and peaceful. "Do you ever think about that day at the train station?" Gabriel asked, his arm around Catherine's shoulders. "Sometimes," Catherine said. "I think about how scared I was, how lost I felt, and I think about how you stepped out of that crowd and gave me hope when I had none." "I knew the moment I saw you," Gabriel said. "I knew you were going to be important to me. I could not have said how or why, but I knew." "Fate," Catherine said softly. "Maybe it was fate." "Maybe," Gabriel agreed. "Or maybe it was just luck, and we were smart enough to recognize it and hold on to it." Catherine turned to look at him. This man who had seen her at her lowest and had chosen to lift her up. This man who had given her everything she had ever wanted without her even knowing she wanted it. "I love you, Gabriel Quincy," she said. "I loved you that first day when you helped me, and I love you more every day that passes." "I love you too, Katherine Quincy," Gabriel said, and he kissed her there on the porch with the snow falling around them, and Catherine thought that this, right here, was what happiness looked like. The years continued to unfold, bringing with them both challenges and joys. There were hard winters and dry summers, years when money was tight and years when it was a little easier. There were illnesses and accidents, moments of fear and grief when one of the children fell ill or a friend passed away. But through it all, Gabriel and Catherine faced everything together, their love deepening and strengthening with each trial they overcame. James grew into a serious, responsible young man who wanted to be a rancher like his father. Ellen became a teacher, fierce and passionate about education and justice. Thomas decided he wanted to be a veterinarian, fascinated by animals and their care. And Margaret, the youngest, showed an early talent for music and art, filling the house with song and color. Gabriel and Catherine watched their children grow with pride and occasional terror, marveling at the people they were becoming. They added on to the house as needed, building more rooms to accommodate their growing family. The ranch prospered, not spectacularly but steadily, providing a good life for everyone who lived there. In 1900, on the 15th anniversary of their wedding, Gabriel gave Catherine a gift. It was a painting he had commissioned from an artist in Little Rock, based on a description he had given. The painting showed a train platform in the snow, with a woman in a green dress standing alone and a man in a cowboy hat approaching her. It captured that moment when their lives had changed forever, when fate or luck or divine intervention had brought them together. Catherine cried when she saw it, tears streaming down her face as she looked at the image of her younger self, so vulnerable and scared, and the image of Gabriel, already her protector before she even knew his name. "It is perfect," she whispered. "It is absolutely perfect." They hung the painting in the parlor where everyone could see it, and over the years, it became a treasured family heirloom, a reminder of where they had come from and how far they had traveled together. Mrs. Chen passed away peacefully in her sleep in 1902, and Gabriel and Catherine mourned her deeply. She had been more than a housekeeper. She had been family, and her loss left a hole in their lives that took a long time to heal. They buried her in the family cemetery on the ranch, and Catherine planted a willow tree over her grave, a tree that grew tall and strong and provided shade for generations to come. Pete and Mateo both stayed on the ranch for decades, eventually retiring but choosing to live in cottages on the property because the ranch was their home, and the Quincy family was their family. New ranch hands came and went over the years, but the core of the operation remained the same, a place built on hard work and mutual respect, and the knowledge that everyone was valued. As Gabriel and Catherine grew older, they gradually handed over more responsibility to James, who had married a local girl named Sarah and was raising his own family on the ranch. Gabriel and Catherine did not retire exactly. But they slowed down, spending more time with their grandchildren, traveling occasionally to visit Ellen in the town where she taught and Thomas at the veterinary college he attended. In the evenings, they still sat together on the porch, watching the sun set over the hills that had become so familiar to Katherine. She could not imagine living anywhere else. Gabriel's hair had gone gray, and Katherine's figure had softened even more with age and childbearing, but when they looked at each other, they still saw the people they had fallen in love with all those years ago. No regrets. Gabriel asked one evening, echoing the question he had asked so many times over the years. "Not a single one," Katherine said, as she always did. "You." "Only that I did not meet you sooner," Gabriel said. "Think of all the years we could have had together." "We had the years we were meant to have," Katherine said wisely, "and we made the most of every single one of them." Gabriel reached over and took her hand, and they sat there in comfortable silence. Two people who had found each other in the most unlikely circumstances and had built a life that exceeded anything either of them had dreamed possible. In 1910, Gabriel fell ill with pneumonia during a particularly harsh winter. Katherine nursed him through it, barely leaving his side, and for a few days she was terrified she was going to lose him. But Gabriel was stubborn and strong, and he pulled through, though it took months for him to fully recover. The illness aged him, though, and Katherine could see that he was not as resilient as he once had been. "I am not ready to leave you yet," Gabriel told her one day as he was recuperating. "We have too much left to do." "Then you had better get well," Katherine said firmly, "because I am not ready to let you go either." And Gabriel did get well, though he was never quite as strong as he had been before. He moved more slowly, tired more easily, but his mind was as sharp as ever, and his love for Katherine and their family never wavered. In the summer of 1915, the entire Quincy clan gathered at the ranch to celebrate Gabriel and Katherine's 30th wedding anniversary. Children and grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren filled the house and spilled out onto the lawn. There was food and music and dancing, and Gabriel insisted on waltzing with Katherine the way they had practiced in the parlor all those years ago, even though his steps were slower, and he had to pause to catch his breath. "Best decision I ever made," Gabriel said as they swayed together to the music, "asking you to marry me." "Best decision I ever made was saying yes," Katherine replied. "Well, that and getting on that train to Arkansas in the first place." Gabriel laughed, and Katherine felt the vibration of it through his chest where her head rested. "Thank God you did," he said. "Thank God those cowboys laughed at you and I saw you standing there, because my life would have been so much emptier without you." "We were meant to find each other," Katherine said. "I really believe that." As the sun set and the party continued around them, Gabriel and Katherine stood together and watched their family, this beautiful, chaotic, wonderful collection of people that they had created together. And Katherine thought about that frightened young woman who had stood on a snowy platform 15 years ago. And she wished she could go back and tell her that everything was going to be all right, that she was going to find love and happiness and a home in the most unexpected place. But maybe that young woman had known, somehow, that things would work out. Maybe that was why she had gotten on the train in the first place, why she had trusted in the possibility of something better. Maybe that was why, when Gabriel had approached her on the platform, she had agreed to go with him instead of running away. Maybe some part of her had recognized what her conscious mind had not yet understood, that this man would change her life in ways she could not imagine. Gabriel lived another 8 years, passing away peacefully in his sleep in 1923 at the age of 68. Katherine held his hand as he took his last breath, and though her heart was breaking, she was grateful that they had had so many years together, that they had built such a rich and full life. She was grateful for every moment, every laugh, every kiss, every shared dream. Katherine lived another 15 years after Gabriel's death, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who loved her and carried on the legacy she and Gabriel had built. She never remarried, never even considered it, because Gabriel had been the love of her life, and no one could ever replace him. She spent her final years on the ranch in the house where she had been both a new bride and a grieving widow, in the place that had become her true home. And on quiet evenings, she would sit on the porch and look out at the hills, and she would remember a snowy day in January when her life had changed forever, when cowboys had laughed, and one cowboy had seen not a woman to mock but a woman to love. Katherine Quincy passed away in her sleep in 1938 at the age of 77, and she was buried next to Gabriel in the family cemetery, under the shade of tall trees her children had planted. The ranch stayed in the family for generations, passed down from parent to child, a testament to the love and hard work of two people who had taken a chance on each other. And the painting that Gabriel had commissioned, the one showing a woman in a green dress and a man in a cowboy hat on a snowy train platform, remained in the family for over 100 years, a reminder that sometimes the worst moments of our lives are actually the beginning of something beautiful, and sometimes the person who saves us is the one we were meant to find all along. The legacy of Gabriel and Katherine Quincy lived on not just in their descendants, but in the values they had instilled, in the community they had helped build, in the example they had set of what love and partnership and determination could accomplish. Their story was passed down through the generations, told and retold at family gatherings, a reminder that the best love stories are not the ones that come easily, but the ones that are built through adversity and choice and daily acts of kindness. And if you had asked any of their descendants what made their story special, they would have told you it was simple. Two people who should never have met found each other in the most unlikely circumstances. One was running from disappointment, and one was simply living his life. But when their paths crossed on a snowy platform in Arkansas in 1885, something magical happened. They saw each other not as strangers but as possibilities, and they had the courage to explore that possibility and see where it led. It led to 30 years of marriage, 4 children, dozens of grandchildren, a ranch that prospered, a community that strengthened, and a love that became legendary in their family. It led to a life well lived, full of joy and sorrow and everything in between, all of it shared and all of it meaningful. And that, in the end, is what made their story worth telling. Not because it was perfect, but because it was real. Not because it was easy, but because they chose each other every single day, even when things were hard. Not because fate or destiny or luck brought them together, but because once they found each other, they held on tight and never let go. The Quincy Ranch still stands today, over a century after Gabriel and Katherine built their life there. And the current generation of Quincy's still tell the story of how it all began, with a curvy bride on a snowy platform and one cowboy who saw his future wife when everyone else just saw someone to laugh at. They tell it to their children, and their children will tell it to their children, and the story will live on as long as there are Quincy's to tell it. A reminder that love can be found in the most unexpected places, and that sometimes the best thing that can happen to us is the thing we never planned for at all. Katherine and Gabriel's love story was not a fairy tale. It was better than that. It was real, built on a foundation of respect and partnership and genuine affection that grew deeper with every passing year. They faced real challenges and real hardships, and they overcame them together. They built something lasting not because it was easy, but because they were committed to each other, and to the life they were creating. And in the end, that is what made their story so powerful and so worth remembering. They proved that love does not have to be perfect to be beautiful, that it does not have to be easy to be worth fighting for, and that sometimes the person who saves us is the one we end up saving right back. They proved that two imperfect people can create something perfect together, and that the journey is just as important as the destination. So when the Quincy descendants tell their story, they do not just talk about the romance, though that is certainly part of it. They talk about the partnership, the hard work, the daily choice to love and support each other. They talk about how Katherine came west expecting one life and found something completely different and infinitely better. They talk about how Gabriel saw past appearances to the person beneath, and how that vision changed both their lives forever. And they talk about that painting, the one that still hangs in the family home, showing two people at the beginning of their journey together. The woman in the green dress looks scared and vulnerable, but if you look closely, you can see determination in the set of her shoulders. The man in the cowboy hat looks calm and steady, but if you look closely, you can see kindness in his eyes. And between them, in the space they are about to close, you can almost see the future they will build together, the life they will share, the love that will sustain them through everything that comes. That painting is more than just an image. It is a promise fulfilled, a reminder that sometimes the universe puts people in each other's paths for a reason, and that the bravest thing we can do is trust in that and see where it leads. For Katherine and Gabriel, it led to everything they had ever wanted and more besides. It led home.